Friday morning, October 26th. Driving south on the freeway. A voice said, "You will meet an extraordinary woman today who will change your life forever." This was shocking, since such a thing seemed very unlikely at this conference. It is actually a very detailed story that began long ago on another world. And I will cover that part as I go along and the characters figure things out. But on the morning of October 26th, James arrived in St. George, still a bit baffled by the message he had received. He unloaded his books and set up his table, then joined the organizers for dinner in the main room. He saw his friend M.G., who had been so helpful to him when he spoke in Mesa that July. M.G. introduced James to her friend Elena. When their hands touched, he felt a shock pass through him, and his heart started beating fast. Elena was gorgeous and vivacious, and James was a little intimidated, yet honored that she would talk to him. He was happily surprised when she mentioned a key part of his novel, The Renewed Earth. No one had ever recognized the significance of that scene before. He had heard that voice before and seen that smile before. He felt they had even talked like this before. But who could be certain when? It was strange, but he could remember. The feelings were very strong, as if they had known each other oh so long. They didn't get many chances to talk after that, because he had to help voice a woman's blue Muppet. But he watched her every chance he could. He had to stay at a relative's house that night, but he hardly slept. He kept envisioning himself with Elena in very wonderful situations that indicated they had been more than just friends. James was the first speaker on Saturday morning and knew exactly where Elena was sitting. He made sure to mention the scene from his book that they had discussed the previous evening. He was completely smitten by her and even was nervous of what she would think of his talk as he spoke. But when he would glance at her, she was always attentive in watching him, unlike the rest of the crowd. After his talk, he went to his book table. His talk had gone well, and there was a good group gathered around to buy books. His heart nearly leapt out of his chest when Elena joined him and helped sell the books. She was so beautiful that he could hardly concentrate on the customers. She straightened the books and gave the books great reviews, although she made him laugh a lot when she kept pushing the youth and fifth volumes of his first series. He could only giggle when people asked if she was his wife, because yes, in fact, she was. She just didn't know it yet. James was definitely having amorous feelings towards Elena as they sold books together. He had not felt this happy in his entire life. He was quite sure this was the woman the voice had told him about. James was ecstatic because he had already fallen deeply in love with her. Or better said, he remembered how much he had already loved her. Her eyes had mesmerized him from the moment they met, but once the book sales slowed down, she stood near him behind the table. They looked deeply into each other's eyes for the first time, and he knew he was in the presence of a goddess. He resisted an impulse to kiss her, but his entire body was on fire. He instinctively knew she was everything he had ever dreamed of. I must clarify that James is a very difficult person to get information from. He has been blessed with great knowledge, but 99% of the people he knows do not realize that. He is very guarded, and it is a great task to gain his trust. But as Elena leaned forward him and asked a couple of very insightful questions, his heart burst with joy. He knew she was one of the very few people on earth he could trust. James' spirit was so excited at this revelation that he shattered a thick veil that had been placed between these two souls during their mortal lives. The thick veil had been placed because of the unique, unparalleled love James and Elena had shared in previous lifetimes. That veil had prevented them from finding each other until this appointed day that would be remembered throughout the heavens as the true beginning of a spectacular mission that would save millions of souls and defeat the forces of darkness. James's physical attraction to Elena was almost overwhelming, but he was equally drawn to the spiritual energy that was radiating from her. As they talked, it was confirmed to him that they had indeed been married before and were eternal companions. He had glimpses of them walking dusty paths together, and he realized they had been married in the life of Jesus Christ, and they had been very close to him. At this time, their spirits could not be restrained any longer, and a long-awaited makeout session took place in that lobby. This was manifest in the mortal world to James and Elena through the scientific phenomenon known as loin fire. As they talked, James had a burning desire to make love to her, but he wasn't sure she felt the same way. But they could not stay away from each other. One time she was sitting on a couch near his table, and he took a seat on a chair about 5 feet from her. She began to squirm and covered her body with her hands. She asked him, "What are you doing?" He wasn't aware of what she meant. All he knew was that if Bruce Porter hadn't been giving them an evil eye, a child would have been conceived on that couch. The erotic tension continued throughout the afternoon. James could only think of her. His desires for her were indescribable. Thankfully, she had worn 16 layers of clothing to survive the 80-degree weather, so he was not fully aware that she truly had the body of a goddess. Her dimensions were exactly what he had always fantasized about, but that revelation would have to wait a month. As the night concluded, James needed to take his empty boxes to his car. With Elena's help, he had sold more books at a show than he ever had before. She helped him carry the boxes to the car, and then he could not resist the desire to hug her. He made an awkward attempt that was way too brief because their friends were bringing more boxes. In that short embrace, though, he knew he had found the woman he had searched for his entire life. It was made crystal clear to him that they had been married before and would be again. He once again had to fight off a powerful urge to kiss her and somehow disguise the massive erection he was experiencing. They returned to the building, and he helped carry tables to the second floor while she sat on the couch. They couldn't take their eyes off each other. He was already madly in love. Her group of friends finally had to leave. He was devastated, unsure how he could ever contact her again. Then her spirit took over and asked him, "Can I get your cell number in case I have some questions?" They exchanged numbers, and then they gave each other a hug goodbye. It was the most wonderful, electric, delicious hug he had ever felt. Then he watched her walk away, knowing she was truly going to change his life forever. That's the end of chapter 1.